I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It started like any other, quiet, unassuming, almost boring. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, while my wife, Karen, was in the kitchen on the phone with her best friend, Lisa. It wasn't unusual for her to chat with Lisa late into the evening, but something about her tone that night caught my attention. It wasn't the cheerful, gossipy voice I was used to hearing. It was hushed, almost urgent. Curious, I turned down the volume on the TV, trying not to seem obvious, and leaned back in my chair. From where I sat, I couldn't see her, but I could hear every word. "I still can't believe it," Karen said, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. "I'm pregnant." My heart swelled. She hadn't told me yet. I could barely contain the grin spreading across my face. We've been trying for years. My mind raced with the thought of cribs, baby clothes, and all the dreams we talked about. Then she said something that shattered my world. "Yeah, by him. And the crazy part? He doesn't even notice. I mean, can you believe it?" It was like a freight train hitting me at full speed. I froze, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. My Karen, my wife of 10 years, pregnant by another man? I didn't move. I couldn't. Her laughter, soft and conspiratorial, echoed in my ears. I sat there in stunned silence as she continued, oblivious to my presence. "Lisa, he's so clueless. Honestly, I don't even feel bad. He's been so caught up in his work, I doubt he'll ever figure it out." The betrayal burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head, but one screamed louder than the rest. How long had this been going on? She ended the call soon after, and I heard her footsteps approaching the living room. I scrambled to turn the TV back up and pretended to be engrossed in some late-night talk show. My heart raced as she walked in, looking every bit like the woman I thought I knew, except now, she was a stranger. "Hey, babe," she said casually, dropping onto the couch beside me. "Anything good on?" I turned to look at her, forcing a smile. "Nothing much," I replied, my voice strained. "You?" She shrugged, her expression so nonchalant it made me sick. "Just Lisa being Lisa." I nodded, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside me. But one thing was clear. The woman sitting next to me wasn't the Karen I thought I'd married. And whatever illusion of a happy marriage I'd been living in was nothing more than a lie. That night, I didn't sleep. How could I? My mind replayed Karen's words over and over. "I'm pregnant by him. He doesn't even notice." I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling as Karen slept soundly beside me, her breathing calm and steady. How could she sleep so peacefully after what she'd done? After what I'd heard? By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to know the truth, the whole truth. If I jumped in too soon, she'd lie or spin some half-baked excuse. No, I had to be smart. I started small. When Karen left for work that day, I searched her phone. She'd been careless, leaving it unlocked on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, half hoping to find nothing, praying that I'd somehow misunderstood. But there it was. A series of texts with someone named Ryan. The messages were casual on the surface, but laced with undertones that made my stomach churn. "Ryan, can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." Face blowing a kiss. "Karen, me too. It's been too long. And don't worry, he's completely in the dark." There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, just them smiling together in places I didn't recognize. A park, a coffee shop, even the beach. She told me she was visiting her mom the weekend those were taken. I felt like a fool. That evening, I followed her. When she left the house, claiming she was meeting Lisa for drinks, I waited 10 minutes and then got in my car. My heart pounded as I tailed her through the city streets, my palms slick with sweat on the steering wheel. She didn't go to Lisa's. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a dimly lit hotel. I watched as a tall, athletic-looking man approached her car. They hugged, and then, without hesitation, they walked inside together. I sat there, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It took everything in me not to storm into that hotel and tear the place apart. But I stayed put, forcing myself to think rationally. Bursting in wouldn't solve anything. I needed more. 2 hours later, they emerged, looking carefree and a little too close. Karen laughed as she leaned into him, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that made me sick to my stomach. I snapped a few photos from the car, my hands shaking. Proof. I needed proof. When Karen got home that night, she greeted me with the same smile she always did, like nothing had happened. I played my part, pretending not to notice the faint smell of cologne on her clothes or the way she avoided my eyes when I asked how her evening went. "It was great," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Lisa's doing well. We had a lot to catch up on." I smiled back, though my stomach twisted in knots. "Glad you had fun," I replied, my voice even. Inside, though, I was unraveling. The days that followed were torture. Karen continued her charade, acting as though everything was normal. Meanwhile, I was living in a state of constant rage, betrayal, and disbelief. Every smile she gave me, every casual touch, felt like a knife in my chest. I kept digging. If she could lie so easily about her affair, what else was she hiding? I combed through our financial records, her emails, and her social media accounts. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. There were receipts for expensive dinners and gifts I had no knowledge of. She had even used our joint credit card to book that hotel room. Our money, spent on nights with him. The gall of it made my blood boil. But it wasn't just the affair. Karen had been distancing herself from me for months, and I'd been too blind to see it. She used work as an excuse, claiming long hours and stress, but the truth was far more sinister. While I was busy building a future for us, she was tearing it apart. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Karen was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I couldn't resist. Swiping it open, I saw another message from Ryan. "Ryan, I can't wait to meet our baby. Have you told him yet? It's getting harder to hide. Our baby. Our baby." I stared at the words, my vision blurring with fury. She was carrying his child, and they were planning their future together right under my nose. My fists clenched as I fought the urge to smash the phone against the wall. When Karen came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, she flashed me a warm smile. "Hey, what do you want for dinner?" she asked, as if nothing was wrong. As if she wasn't a complete stranger to me. I couldn't look at her. "Whatever you want," I muttered, forcing a neutral tone. She didn't notice the tension. She never did. That night, I started formulating a plan. If Karen thought she could make a fool out of me, she was sorely mistaken. She didn't realize it yet, but she had already lost. I began consulting with a lawyer the following week, explaining everything I discovered. I showed them the texts, the photos, the receipts, every piece of evidence I had painstakingly collected. The lawyer was sympathetic but ruthless, outlining a strategy to ensure I came out on top. "You have a strong case," she said, looking over the documents. "She's been unfaithful, and with this proof, we can protect your assets. She won't get a dime more than she's entitled to." It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about justice. Karen had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. By the time I left the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I had control. The power was shifting back to me, and I intended to use it. That night, I sat across from Karen at the dinner table, watching her laugh at something on her phone. She had no idea what was coming, but soon, she would. I decided the confrontation had to be carefully timed. I wanted Karen to feel every ounce of betrayal I'd felt, but I also needed to remain in control. Losing my temper wouldn't accomplish anything. The perfect moment presented itself one evening when she came home late. She strolled through the door, her face lit up with an almost guilty glow, carrying a bag of takeout. "Hey, babe," she said, placing the bag on the counter. "I thought I'd bring dinner home. You've been working so hard lately." The audacity of her fake thoughtfulness made my stomach churn. "Thanks," I said evenly, standing at the edge of the kitchen. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered slightly. "Talk about what?" I gestured toward the dining table. "Sit down." Karen hesitated, but eventually obeyed, her curiosity clearly piqued. I took my seat across from her, placing my phone on the table. "What's this about?" she asked, feigning innocence. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence weigh on her. "I know," I finally said, my voice low but firm. Her brow furrowed. You know what? Don't play dumb, Karen, I snapped, my composure slipping just a bit. I know about Ryan. I know about the affair. I know the baby isn't mine. The blood drained from her face, and her mouth opened as if to deny it, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. Are you going to lie to me again? I pressed, leaning forward. Or are you finally going to tell me the truth? Her eyes filled with tears, and she covered her face with her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It just did. I let out a bitter laugh. It just happened? You've been sneaking around with him for months, years, maybe, and that's all you've got? It just happened? She lowered her hands, her expression shifting from guilt to defensiveness. You were never around, she shot back. You were so busy with work, with your projects, with everything else. I was lonely, okay? Ryan was there when you weren't. Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her twist this into my fault. So your solution was to cheat? To sleep with another man and then bring his child into our marriage? Karen's lips trembled, but she didn't respond. You've been lying to me for God knows how long, I continued, my voice rising. Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed everything. Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. This was her mess, her betrayal. Is he worth it? I asked coldly. Is Ryan worth throwing away our life together? She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I stood, pushing back my chair with a scrape. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, I said, my tone icy. Start packing your things, Karen. You're leaving. Her eyes widened in shock. Wait, what? You can't just throw me out. Watch me, I said, turning away. As I walked out of the room, her sobs echoed behind me, but I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, hollow ache where my marriage had once been. Karen spent the next few days walking on eggshells, avoiding me whenever possible. She moved between the bedroom and the living room like a ghost, her eyes swollen from crying. I didn't care. My sympathy had run dry. I'd already started taking steps to remove her from my life. The lawyer had drawn up the necessary papers, and I'd secured all of our shared finances, moving my money into a separate account. Karen had no idea, but soon, she'd have nothing left. One evening, as I came home from work, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn. Can we talk? She asked softly. I hesitated, debating whether I even wanted to hear her out. But part of me needed to know why. Why she had chosen to betray me so completely. With a nod, I sat across from her. What do you want to say? I asked, my tone flat. I'm sorry, she began, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. But it wasn't all bad, was it? We had good years together. Can't we try to fix this? Her words were like knives, twisting the wound she'd already inflicted. Fix this? I repeated bitterly. How do you propose we fix this, Karen? By pretending your affair never happened? By pretending the baby you're carrying is mine? Tears welled in her eyes again, but I pressed on. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed every ounce of trust, every good memory we ever had. And now you expect me to just, what? Forgive you? Move on like nothing happened? She flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I made a mistake, she whispered. I was weak and Ryan. He was there for me in ways you weren't. My jaw tightened. Don't you dare blame me for this, I said through gritted teeth. I was working to provide for us, to build a future for us. Meanwhile, you were out with him, laughing behind my back. I didn't plan for this to happen, she insisted. I didn't mean to fall in love with him. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. Fall in love, I echoed. So that's what this was? Love? Karen hesitated, then nodded. Yes, she said quietly, but I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose what we had. I laughed bitterly. You lost it the moment you stepped into that hotel room with him. The moment you decided your feelings for Ryan were more important than our marriage. She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, her expression one of defeat. That night, I slept in the guest room. Karen stayed in the master bedroom, probably crying herself to sleep. But I didn't care. All I could think about was how to make her pay for what she'd done. The next morning, I made an appointment to change the locks on the house. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell her anything anymore. Every word, every conversation felt pointless. She wasn't the woman I'd married. She was a stranger, someone I barely recognized. Over the next week, I started packing her belongings. I didn't ask her where she planned to go, and she didn't volunteer the information. I just wanted her gone. One evening, as I boxed up her clothes, I came across a hidden envelope in the back of her closet. Curious, I opened it. Inside were letters from Ryan, dating back nearly a year. Each one was filled with declarations of love, promises of a future together. I felt sick. This wasn't just an affair. It was a relationship, a life she'd been building without me, right under my nose. I tossed the letters into the box with her clothes, my anger boiling over. If she wanted a future with Ryan, she could have it, but she wouldn't take anything from me. By this point, I was a man on a mission. Karen's betrayal had consumed every part of me, but instead of breaking me, it gave me a razor-sharp focus. If she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she had another thing coming. I met with my lawyer again, detailing everything I'd uncovered. The texts, the photos, the letters, all of it painted a damning picture. How do we make sure she gets nothing? I asked. The lawyer gave me a calculating look. We'll file on the grounds of infidelity, and with this evidence, the court will be on your side. Do you own the house outright? Yes, I said. It was mine before we got married. And there's a prenup. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. Then you're in a good position. We'll make sure she walks away with as little as possible. That was music to my ears. Karen didn't just betray me. She betrayed everything we'd built together. And now, I was going to take it all back. The final blow needed to be public. Karen had lied to me in private, hidden her affair in the shadows. But I wanted the truth to come into the light. If she was so proud of her relationship with Ryan, she could own it in front of everyone. I planned a dinner party, a farewell, I told Karen, for an old friend moving out of state. She hesitated at first, clearly uneasy about the idea of socializing under the circumstances, but I insisted. We need a distraction, I said. Something to remind us of better times. She agreed, though her reluctance was obvious. Little did she know, this dinner wasn't just a farewell. It was the stage for her downfall. On the night of the party, Karen dressed impeccably, as if trying to maintain the facade of a loving wife. She greeted our guests with forced cheer, her laugh too bright, her smile too wide. I watched her closely, every fake gesture solidifying my resolve. Once everyone had eaten and the mood was light, I stood to give a toast. Karen looked at me with a mixture of surprise and suspicion as I raised my glass. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, I began, my voice steady. It's always a pleasure to be surrounded by friends. But tonight isn't just about saying goodbye to one friend. It's also about starting fresh. Karen's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. For those who don't know, I continued, Karen and I have been going through a rough patch. Marriage isn't easy, but it's built on trust. And when that trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild. The room fell silent, the guests exchanging awkward glances. Karen's face turned pale. But I've learned something important, I said, my tone hardening. When someone shows you who they truly are, you have to believe them. Karen's hand trembled as she set her glass down. What are you doing? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photos I'd taken of her and Ryan. I held them up for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the room as I laid them on the table. This, I said, pointing to the evidence, is who Karen really is. Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. How dare you? She hissed, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. This isn't the time or place for this. Oh, I think it's the perfect time, I shot back. You wanted to live a double life? Now everyone knows the truth. The guests sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to leave or stay. Karen's mask had finally cracked, and beneath it was a woman I no longer recognized. That night, after the guests left in a flurry of uncomfortable goodbyes, Karen confronted me. You humiliated me, she said, her voice thick with tears. No, I replied coldly. You humiliated yourself. All I did was reveal the truth. She stared at me for a long moment, as if searching for a shred of forgiveness. But she found none. You'll regret this, she said finally, her voice a venomous whisper. I didn't respond. As she stormed off to the bedroom, I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. She could threaten me all she wanted, but the wheels were already in motion. This was far from over. Karen spent the next few days sulking, avoiding me as much as possible. The humiliation of the dinner party had shattered her carefully constructed facade, and she was clearly struggling to regain control of the situation. Meanwhile, I focused on tying up loose ends. I filed the divorce papers and had the locks on the house changed. Karen hadn't yet moved out, but it was only a matter of time. I made sure of that. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, she finally snapped. You can't just throw me out like this, she yelled, standing in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed. I'm not throwing you out, I said calmly. I'm giving you exactly what you wanted, a new life. You should be thanking me. Her face flushed with anger. This is my house too. No, I corrected, pulling out the deed. It's mine, and thanks to the prenup, you're entitled to none of it. So I suggest you start packing. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, she seemed truly defeated. By Friday, Karen had packed her things into a few suitcases. She refused to look at me as she loaded them into her car. As she stood in the doorway one last time, she finally spoke. I never wanted it to end like this, she said, her voice soft, almost mournful. I met her gaze, feeling no sympathy. Neither did I. She hesitated, as if waiting for me to say something else, but I stayed silent. With a final nod, she turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the house we had once shared. The silence was deafening after she left. For the first time in years, I was completely alone, and the weight of everything that had happened finally hit me. I wandered through the house, noticing how empty it felt without her presence. Her favorite mug was gone from the kitchen. The scent of her perfume no longer lingered in the air. It should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like a void I didn't know how to fill. For a moment, I almost regretted how things had ended. Almost. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the utter disregard for everything we'd built together. And just like that, any lingering sadness was replaced with cold resolve. This wasn't the end of my revenge. It was just the beginning. The quiet didn't last long. Barely a week after Karen left, I got a call from my lawyer. We've hit a snag, she said, her voice tense. Karen's lawyer has filed a counterclaim. She's contesting the prenup. What? I barked, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. She has no grounds to contest it. She's claiming she was coerced into signing, the lawyer explained. It's a common tactic, but if the court believes her, it could complicate things. I slammed my fist onto the desk. She's grasping at straws. That prenup was rock solid, and she signed it willingly. Stay calm, my lawyer said. We'll fight it, but I need you to prepare for a potential battle. The thought of Karen dragging this out made my blood boil. She had already taken so much from me, and now she wanted more? Later that evening, I sat down with the folder of evidence I'd compiled. As I flipped through the photos and messages, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Karen's betrayal was deeper than I had initially realized. But how deep? That's when it hit me. I hadn't fully explored her financial activity. I pulled out the bank statements I'd retrieved weeks earlier and went through them with a fine-toothed comb. At first, everything seemed normal. Groceries, gas, the occasional dinner. But then I noticed a series of large withdrawals, all labeled as transfers. Curious, I cross-referenced the account numbers. To my horror, they didn't belong to any of our joint accounts. She had a secret account. The next day, I visited the bank and requested a full financial audit of our accounts. The manager hesitated at first, but once I provided the necessary documentation, they relented. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Karen had been funneling money into her secret account for over a year, tens of thousands of dollars in total. Fury coursed through me as I realized what she'd been doing. She wasn't just unfaithful. She'd been preparing for her escape all along. Every time she smiled at me, every time she pretended everything was fine, she was robbing me blind. I returned home, seething with rage. The betrayal felt endless, like a wound that refused to heal. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I channeled it into action. I called my lawyer immediately, explaining what I discovered. "Can we use this against her?" I asked. "Absolutely," she replied, her tone sharp. "This strengthens your case. If she's been siphoning money, it's a clear violation of marital trust. We'll present this to the court." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Karen thought she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. Armed with the new evidence, I was ready to face Karen in court. My lawyer wasted no time filing a motion to expose her financial deception. The look on her face when the evidence was presented during the preliminary hearing was priceless. Shock, fear, and, most satisfyingly, panic. Her lawyer scrambled to explain the hidden account, claiming it was a personal savings fund for emergencies. But the transactions told a different story. Some of the money had gone toward extravagant gifts, hotel stays, and even payments to Ryan. The judge didn't buy her excuses. Instead, he froze her secret account and ruled that the funds would be considered part of our marital assets. Karen's composure cracked. For the first time, I saw her facade crumble completely. While the legal battle with Karen raged on, I decided to deal with Ryan. Using the information I'd gathered, I tracked down his wife. Her name was Vanessa, and she was the picture of grace, a woman who had no idea her husband had been cheating. I met her at a coffee shop one afternoon, nervous about how she'd react to the news. "I'm sorry to do this," I said, sliding the photos and messages across the table, "but you deserve to know." Vanessa's face went pale as she looked through the evidence. "I can't believe this," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know it's a lot to process," I said gently, "but I thought you should hear it from me." She thanked me through her tears, and as I left the coffee shop, I felt a small sense of justice. Ryan wasn't getting away with this either. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen dropped a bombshell. She called me one evening, her voice trembling with desperation. "Ryan's gone," she said. "What are you talking about?" I asked coldly. "He left," she sobbed. "He said he doesn't want to deal with the baby or the fallout from this mess." I couldn't help but laugh. "And you thought he was your future? Guess you picked the wrong guy." Her silence was deafening. This was the cruel twist of her betrayal. Karen had sacrificed everything for a man who didn't even want her. With Ryan out of the picture, Karen tried to shift her focus back to me. She left voicemails begging for forgiveness, sent emails promising to make things right, and even showed up at the house unannounced. But I was done. I had the locks changed again and filed a restraining order after she started showing up at my workplace. My lawyer made it clear that any further attempts to contact me would result in legal consequences. Karen's desperation was pathetic. She had lost everything: her lover, her financial security, and now, her access to me. The divorce proceedings dragged on for months, but in the end, justice prevailed. The court ruled in my favor on all counts. Karen's infidelity, financial deception, and general lack of contribution to the marriage worked against her. She walked away with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her secret account was emptied and split as part of the marital assets. The house, my savings, and my retirement remained untouched. As the judge finalized the divorce, I glanced at Karen one last time. She looked defeated, a shadow of the woman I once knew. Part of me felt sorry for her, but the rest of me felt liberated. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The house, once filled with painful memories, now felt like a blank canvas. I redecorated, rearranged, and removed every trace of Karen's presence. I also reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during my marriage. Their support reminded me that life didn't end with betrayal. It was just a new chapter. I even started therapy, determined to work through the anger and pain. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I found myself sitting on the back porch, watching the sunset. The air was crisp, the sky painted with hues of orange and pink. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Karen's betrayal had shattered my world, but it had also forced me to reevaluate everything. I'd emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As I sipped my drink and listened to the sounds of the evening, I realized that my life was finally my own again. The chapter with Karen was over, and a new one was beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I would never let anyone take advantage of me again. And that, I thought, was the ultimate revenge.